Okay, we're at time now, so I'll get us started. But before we do start the session, just like to run through a couple of housekeeping points, which you'll also see on the screen there. Just to encourage you, first of all, to use the chat box to pose any questions or comments to the speakers. We will be monitoring the chat box and we'll have time at the end of the session to go through any Q&A. Just to let you all know that we will be recording this discussion and we'll be making it available post-session on the UCISA website. That will be behind a login for UCISA members, and we will email you a link to that recording in the next couple of days. At the end of the session, the recording will also drop into the chat box, but you won't be able to have access to that. That's just for those on the UCISA tenancy. So we will email you those details. And then just a reminder to please remember to mute your microphones and to switch off your camera during the session. Otherwise, if your camera's on, you will show on the recording. And just a final ask to please do not use any AI note takers for this. And if any do pop up in the chat, then they will be removed from the meeting. So that's the brief housekeeping. So now just to get started on the session, I would like to invite Mark Johnson, who is Director of IT Services at the University of Glasgow and UCISA trustee, to take the floor. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Sean. I think we've just said half of what I was going to say. So hi and welcome to everybody. For those that don't know me, as Sean said, Mark Johnston, Director of IT at the University of Glasgow and an elected trustee at UCISA. So you may also know me as the person that's been working with UCISA and JISC on what a solution could be to the the Oracle Java licensing situation. So for those that have been tracking that, a couple of years ago, January 2023, Oracle Java changed their licensing model. And even if just one member of staff is using that within your organization, you need to license every member of staff within your organization. So where we have been working through that as an option about how as a sector we can negotiate with Oracle on a fair price for Oracle's Java, a proposition just landed into the inboxes for the organizations that were interested in that. But actually there are other options. So despite kind of leading the sector on that negotiation with Oracle alongside JISC and UCISA on what an option could be for the Oracle licensing, there are other suppliers that operate in the market. So we've got a couple of people from Azul who I will introduce in a moment. But what I thought it'd be worth doing is to bringing the awareness of other organizations to you. And for those of you that don't know, Azul, they've been established for over 20 years and are 100% focused on Java. They're one of the main contributors to the OpenJDK community. Obviously, that's with Oracle, Microsoft, Java, Red Hat, and others. But significantly, the only organization providing their own JDK distribution as a like-for-like replacement for Oracle's Java SE. So as Azul approached me and said, is this worth raising awareness of across the sector? It was that like-for-like replacement for Oracle's Java SE that kind of caught my eye and thought this is worth bringing to the table as an option to explore. So along with Oracle, Azul's cadence for releasing those invaluable critical security patch updates, which of course is what we're looking for on that regular basis. Azul, like Oracle, do theirs quarterly, which no other JDK distribution offers that. But interestingly, I'd be interested in the chat to see if this applies to you. Azul are the only other organization that provides support for legacy versions of Java 6 and Java 7. Many of us will have huge dependencies on Java 8 and later, but not even Oracle provide the support for Java 6 and Java 7, which Azul are believing are still heavily utilized within the higher education sector today. So it'd be interesting just to record in the chat if you are a Java or knowingly a Java 6 or Java 7 user, it would be good to know. But let me get into introductions and into the meat of the call. So I'm joined today by two of the key people at Azul to talk to you. So Simon Ritter, who's the Deputy CTO at Azul. He'll be speaking to you secondly. But first up is Stephen Piper, Sales Director at Azul. Stephen, let me bring you off mute and into the table, please.
Thank you, Mark, and good afternoon to you all. It's an absolute pleasure to be able to speak with you all. We're very delighted to be part of the UCISA community, and as Mark says, there's a significant opportunity, and I think for looking at alternatives to Oracle as Java. We've had some great success with other universities in other regions, and I'm very confident that we've got the right solutions to perhaps be considered while you're looking at your Java challenges. I will be looking at the questions that come in, so please do ask questions as they come in. We'll certainly make sure that we're capturing as many as we can. But I'll hand over from this introduction from me now to Simon. Thank you, Simon.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, so yes, the idea behind this session, as Mark said, is to talk about what are the alternatives, but also to give you a greater knowledge about the sort of situation as it is, because there's a lot of details that people don't really kind of understand. And I thought what I'd do to start with is just to talk through some of the basic terminology, because if you look at Java, there's really a lot of three-letter acronyms that come up. And so what I'll do is I'll just talk about a couple of those to help people understand what we're talking about here. So the first of those is what we refer to as the JDK, and this is the Java Development Kit. Now, that's basically all the things that you need in order to both develop and run Java applications. So it does allow you to build your applications, but it also allows you to run your applications. The sort of subset of that is what we call the Java runtime environment, and that's essentially only the parts of the Java development kit that you need in order to run applications. So if you're not actually writing code, if you're not compiling code, and all you want to do is run a Java application, then you can use the JRE, as it's referred to, the Java runtime environment. So as I say, that is a subset of the JDK. And then the other thing that comes up very frequently is what we call the Java virtual machine. And that's the thing which is actually used to run the Java application. So it's included in the JRE, it's included in JDK. It is really the heart of the Java runtime environment. It's the engine that runs the application. Right, so what I'd also like to do is to give you a very brief history of Java, and you'll understand why I want to talk through this in a moment. But if you look at Java, Java is now basically 30 years old. It will be 30 years old next month. And again, if we look at the history of Java as a platform, it started way back in 1995, and that was the time when, if you can remember that far back, web browsers were a new thing. The internet was a new thing. And what Java did was it gave you the ability to run applets, as they were called, within a Java browser, a Java-enabled browser, and that gave you much more interaction than we'd ever seen before. Obviously, compared to what we have today, that's a very different situation. But the reality was that Sun wanted to make Java a success. And to do that, they went down the route of saying, okay, to make Java a success, we will give it away for free. So we will not charge anybody to use Java, with the exception of if it was on a mobile phone or an embedded device or something like that. But if you're using it on desktops, laptops, servers, they did not charge you for it. Now, unfortunately, the reality of a business model that's based on free is often that doesn't really generate a lot of money. And the consequence was that in 2010, we saw that Sun was not making a lot of money, and it gradually sort of got to the point where it was determined that for the future, Oracle was going to acquire Sun Microsystems, and that's what happened in 2010. So great. Okay, so now Java is under the control of Oracle. They are the steward of Java. And to start with, they said, let's use the same approach. Let's give Java away for free, continue to make it a success, continue to allow people to use it in wherever they want and not have to pay for it. Right, but then they decided to make some changes. And so we go back a few years to 2018. And one of the main changes that they said was, rather than having 2, 3, or even 4 years between major releases of Java, they wanted a much more predictable release cadence for the Java platform. They said, let's have one release every 6 months. So obviously there will be 2 releases every year. And that has worked very well. If you talk to Java developers, they're very appreciative of this. They've seen the platform evolve much more quickly than it ever did before, and they're getting new features when they want them and all sorts of good things like that. But the sort of side effect of that was that in terms of providing extended support for older releases, it was never going to be practical to do that for all of the releases that came out. If you're dealing with 2 releases every year, after 5 years you've got 10 releases, after 10 years you've got 20 releases, and it's just not going to be practical to offer extended support and maintenance for all of those releases. Oracle decided that for the Oracle JDK, what they would do is they would say, right, we will nominate certain releases as being ones that are long-term support. So those ones would have extended maintenance, extended support, but not all. And again, what other people have done in terms of distributions, they've said, right, we're going to follow Oracle and we'll take the same versions that are long-term support as Oracle do. So at least there's consistency across the market. In terms of which ones are long-term support, because JDK 8 was being used pretty much, that was the popular one at the time, they made that the first long-term support release. And then they said the next one will be JDK 11, and subsequently it would be 3 years between long-term support releases. Very logically then, 3 years, 6 releases, JDK 17 is the next long-term support release. But then Oracle being Oracle, they decided to change their mind yet again, and they said rather than 3 years between releases, they would have only 2 years between releases. So now it's 4 versions, and the current long-term support release is JDK 21. The next one, again, very logically, will be JDK 25 that will come out in September of this year. So that's the way that we release Java. Then what we need to look at is the licensing, because this is where things have changed as well. And what we can see is that in the case of the way that Oracle licensing works is there are actually 3 different licenses that they use. First of those is the old license, and that was pretty much the same as the license that Sun Microsystem used, the one that made it free for use almost any way you wanted to. As I said, unless you were using it in an embedded device or a mobile phone, then you didn't have to pay for the use of Java. In terms of where that applies, then it's all versions of JDK 8 up to update 202. Once you get beyond update 202, things change, but for all of the earlier updates of JDK 8, this license applies. Need to be a little bit careful because there is a thing about if you use commercial features. So if you've installed JDK 8, even the older ones, using the MSI installer for Windows, that technically is a commercial feature, and you might have to talk to Oracle about licensing that. So then we have the second Oracle license, and this was introduced when they released JDK 11. And this is called the Oracle Technology Network License Agreement. Now that's much more restrictive in terms of where you can use it without paying Oracle, because they wanted to introduce this idea of Java SE subscription. If you want to use the Oracle JDK without buying a Java SE subscription, there are only 4 places you can do that. The first is personal use. So if you're at home playing Minecraft, which is based on Java, then you can still get updates without having to pay for them. If you're doing development, testing, proof of concept, demonstrations, all those sorts of things, then you don't have to pay for it. But for what we consider sort of more commercial applications, then only Oracle approved applications get a free use of Oracle Java. So if you're using things like WebLogic or the Fusion middleware applications from Oracle, then that includes the license for Java, or if you're running your application in the Oracle Cloud. Any other use, so in your own data center, on desktops, laptops, and so on, then you have to buy a Java SE subscription from Oracle to get the updates. Currently, that applies to JDK 8 update 211 and later. It applies to all of JDK 11, and bizarrely, it also applies to JDK 17 update 13 and later. Now, I'll explain why that's the case with the next slide. So Oracle then introduced a third license called the Oracle No Fee Terms and Conditions. And you might look at that name and think to yourself, that means free. And it does actually include more use where you don't have to buy a Java SE subscription. So now they say you can use it for personal use, playing Minecraft, you can use it for development and testing, and you could use it for internal commercial use. Unfortunately, that's a rather ambiguous description that they use. And I've actually put the license text here, which says that you can use it for your own personal use or internal business operations. But nowhere in the license does it actually qualify what an internal business operation is. So I don't know that if you're running a web server inside your data center, but it's accessible to your customers outside of the data center, does that still qualify as an internal business use? Okay, you have to ask Oracle about that. Also, it says you can't redistribute it for free if you charge for your application. And the other thing about this license is it isn't perpetual. So Oracle said that that's fine. We'll introduce this for JDK 21 and JDK 17, but it will only apply until 1 year after the release of the next long-term support release. And this is why JDK 17 update 13 and later have this license, because JDK 17 was released 3 years before JDK 21, and that means that the license has now reverted back to the license that is the Oracle Technology Network License Agreement. So what I've tried to do here is to put that into a picture, because it's very complicated in terms of which versions of Java and even which updates of Java need the different licenses. So as you can see here at the top, JDK 8, update 202 and earlier, that's free on desktops and servers. Then we get into the Oracle Technology Network License Agreement that does require a Java SE subscription if you're using it for pretty much any business operation. So that's update 211 of JDK 8 and onwards, all of JDK 11, and now JDK 17 update 13 and beyond. But for JDK 17 update 12 and earlier, and JDK 21, I did say it was complicated, then that will be covered by the no fee terms and conditions license. Now, as I said, September 2024 was when we saw a change in the licensing for JDK 17. We had the 1 year after the release of the next long-term support release, which was JDK 21, and so the license for JDK 17 reverted back to the OTNLA, meaning that you would need to buy a Java SE subscription. Now, if you're using Java 17, what you might think to yourself is, okay, well, we'll just update to the new long-term support release, JDK 21, and then we can continue using updates to that without having to pay for them, which is quite correct. But what you're then going to have to think to yourself is you are going to have to update to the newer long-term support release every 2 years, because there's now only 2 years between releases, meaning that when JDK 25 comes out, there'll be another year after that, and then JDK 21 will revert back to the other license. So it does become quite a complicated thing in terms of if you want to try and use Oracle Java for free, then you are going to have to update every 2 years. Now, the other thing that Mark did mention in his introduction is that the pricing of the Oracle JDK has changed. If you look back to before January of 2023, the way that Oracle priced the Java SE subscription was at least logical in the sense that it was based on how much you used Java. On the server side, you would look at the number of cores you were using or the number of vCores in the cloud, and then depending on what the actual type of processor you had, then you would have a particular multiplier that Oracle would give you. You would take the number of cores that you had of that type, multiply it by the multiplier, add everything up, multiply that number by the number of which is the cost for server-side Java from Oracle, and that gives you a number. On the desktop, again, it's sort of based on the number of machines, but also you have to use this named user plus. If people are sharing a machine, then you count the number of people sharing the machine, not the actual number of machines. Again, multiply that by the number that Oracle gives you and you get a price. But at least it's based on how much you use. So number of cores, number of users, number of machines, and so on. Then in January 2023, Oracle decided that they would simplify the way they did their pricing. And the way they simplified it was to say, let's not bother counting how many processors you use. Let's not bother counting how many machines or how many people share those machines. Let's simply make it based on the number of people that you employ. And when they say the people you employ, that means full-time employees, part-time employees, contractors, and any employees of any outsourcing companies that support your business, your internal business operations. So if you're using an external company to do support for your applications, then you also have to include the people that do that support for you. Now, what this has led to is some really quite astronomical increases in licensing costs. As people come up to the renewal of their Oracle license for Java, what they're seeing is that the price that they're going to be charged, now that it's based on the number of employees, is significantly bigger in almost all cases than it was before. So we are talking to a particular university, and they have been given a cost of $1.4 million per year. Now that's just for Java. And to me, that seems like an quite outrageous, I think is probably a good word to say, outrageous number when you think that this is infrastructure software that's being used in only certain places, and yet they're being asked to pay $1.4 million per year. So let's talk a little bit about how the market is reacting to this. And what we did at Azure was we did a survey of Java users, and what the results that we got from that, I just want to highlight a few particular things. So the first of those is that 86% of the people who responded to our survey said they are going to migrate off Oracle Java. That's very logical. Also, 38% said they're migrating due to uncertainty created by the ongoing price and policy changes. We've seen 4 changes to licensing and pricing in the last 4 years, and that's resulted in 2/5 of the people who responded saying that they're not just concerned about the price, they're concerned about the fact that things are changing and may change again in the future in an unpredictable way. And then the other thing is that over half of the users that we surveyed said they're migrating because of the license costs. Clearly, they're seeing an increase and they're worried about that. They need to look for a cheaper alternative and need to migrate off. In terms of that migration process, and I'm going to come back to that in a moment to talk about the realities of what's involved in that, 84% of the people who have gone through this migration said that their migration went as expected or was easier than expected. So that there are very few people who've been caught out by things that have required a lot more effort or a lot more work than they thought it would. Of the people that responded, again, nearly a quarter said that their migrations had been completed in less than 3 months. So obviously in that case, it's a very simple, very straightforward migration. And we said that, again, 75% of the people who our survey completed their migrations within 1 year. That's very typical. We see that people are taking about a year, not necessarily because it takes a year to do the migration, but it's advisable to have plenty of time so that you can do the planning, you can look at how to do the execution, how to do the testing, the verification, and so on, and not be pushed so that you've only got a few months before your license expires and you're really trying to get everything done very quickly. So a lot of our customers are looking at, okay, we know we've got a year until the license renewal comes up. Let's use that time, plan everything, and get everything running in a very smooth way. So the good news is that Java is open source. So when we talk about alternatives, in the same way that Linux is an open source project, Java is an open source project. With Linux, if you want to run an application on a Linux distribution, then you make a choice of Ubuntu, you make a choice of Red Hat or SUSE or whoever. And the same thing applies with Java. Obviously in the past, Sun and then Oracle has been the primary choice because it was given away for free. So there really wasn't a market for alternative distributions. But what we've seen now is a real proliferation of different distributions of open source Java. And the diagram here shows that, again, as Mark said, there are lots of people contributing code to the open source Java project, OpenJDK. So you've got engineers from Oracle, you've got engineers from Azure, Red Hat, Amazon, SAP, lots and lots of different organizations. All that goes into the project, it gets used, build, and then we can get different distributions, which is what you can install on your machine to run your application. Amazon have a build called Corretto. They make it available free in the AWS cloud, or you can use it freely outside of the AWS cloud, but without support. Temurin is one that's being developed by the Eclipse Foundation. Again, it's free. We've got Azure Platform Core, you've got Oracle, and there are others as well. Now, one of the key things about why you want to make a choice for a particular distribution is to think about how to keep your system secure. And that really is one of the most important decisions that you need to make. Now, the way that security works in Java is that there is a group within this open source project. It's called the OpenJDK Vulnerability Group. Now, even though it's an open source project, this group, because they're working on known vulnerabilities, they don't want to make that information public. So all of the information shared by this group is kept secret. All of the email between the members of the group is encrypted and nothing is published. And that, as I say, is because the vulnerabilities that they're working on have not been addressed yet. So we don't want to release any information about that so that people can then start trying to exploit them. Azul is a member of this group. In fact, I am a representative on that group as well. Not all JDK providers are. So that's something to bear in mind when you're talking about choosing a particular distribution. And what we do as a group is we work together collaboratively. So there'll be engineers from Amazon, there'll be engineers from Red Hat, IBM, Oracle, and so on, all working on these fixes. And what this means for us as a distribution provider is that we have advanced knowledge of what's going to go into each of the updates. So there are 4 updates per year to Java: January, April, July, and October. And those will include a number of security patches. What we can do is look at the code as it's being developed, and then we can backport it to older versions to where necessary to make sure that we have the maximum level of security for that. So we have the time to do the backporting of those changes. We can then do the builds. We can then run all of what are called the TCK tests. This is another thing which is very good about Java. It has a formal specification. Unlike Linux, which doesn't, with Java, because you have a formal specification, there's a test suite which you can verify to make sure that your builds actually match the specification. What that then allows us to do is effectively deliver our updates simultaneously with Oracle. And when I say simultaneously, to date, we've had our update available within 60 minutes of when Oracle released theirs. Now that's important because some distributions could be days or even weeks behind the Oracle update. If you have to wait weeks, that means that there are weeks when the update that's been released has the details of the vulnerabilities that are fixed, which means people then know which ones can be exploited. They can start developing exploits for those. That can take a matter of days. So if you're waiting weeks, there could be time when you're exposed to those vulnerabilities and not able to address them. Because we make our updates available within 60 minutes, that means there is no time when you're exposed to those vulnerabilities without being able to deploy the patches on your systems. Looking a little bit more detail about what it is we provide in terms of our Azul Platform Core, as I say, it's basically a distribution. It's a build of the OpenJDK source code. So functionally, it's identical to what you get from Oracle. It's all TCK tested. So again, we can verify against the test suite that it is exactly the same as what Oracle provides. Now I say here it excludes JDK 6 and 7. That's not because we don't want to run the TCK on that. It's because Oracle no longer support those versions. So they've withdrawn the license to the test suite. Because we have tested it in the past and we know what changes we're making, we are very confident that it doesn't break the specification. We are the only provider that still provides updates to JDK 6 and JDK 7. So if you are running these older versions, then you can still continue to use them and receive the updates for security and bug fixes so that you can then keep your systems as secure and stable as possible. We also provide very wide platform support, all of the standard 64-bit operating systems, Windows, Mac, and Linux. Again, we have people who are using older operating systems, things like Windows XP still, running their JDK 6 maybe. And so we have builds for 32-bit Windows and Linux on Intel. We have other platforms like Solaris on 32 and 64-bit builds as well. Another thing to highlight is, again, that we provide an identical service to what you would get from Oracle. So we're functionally identical in terms of the JDK, but what you get in terms of the updates and everything is also identical. And in this case, what we're talking about is the way that Oracle delivers those updates. They actually provide 2 different versions, one called the CPU or Critical Patch Update, which only contains security changes. Now that's typically going to be a very small set of changes, maybe somewhere in the region of like 2 to perhaps a dozen changes. The other update they provide is the full update, or PSU, Patch Set Update, and that contains all of the security fixes plus bug fixes, enhancements, all sorts of code changes. And that's going to be very different in terms of size. That could be 2, 3, even 400 changes compared to less than a dozen for the security only update. And again, we are the only distribution that offers both of these. All of the other distributions that you'll get, the free ones, will only provide you with the full patch set update. Why is this important? Well, what I did was an analysis of JDK 6, and I looked at if you had not installed an update since a particular date, how many vulnerabilities are you going to be exposed to? And let's just take the left-hand side of this chart here, which is basically where Oracle stopped providing free updates to JDK 6. So it goes all the way back to July 2013. If you haven't updated a JDK 6 runtime since Oracle stopped providing those free updates, you're currently exposed to 425 vulnerabilities, of which 89 are critical. So that means they're in the scoring of CVSS of 9.0 to 10.0. 89 critical vulnerabilities. So it really is very, very important if you want to continue using older versions of Java that you do need to update them to maintain that level of security to ensure that you get your systems as secure as possible. Potential cost of not updating. Well, obviously, it's literally an unbounded number, because if people can break into your systems, they can steal data. If people can run denial of service attacks on your systems, then there is cost associated with that to your organization. But there's also legislation that you need to be aware of. So we have now the Cybersecurity and Resilience Bill. This is likely to enter Parliament later this year. And what that says is that if you fail to patch against known vulnerabilities, and that chart I just showed you shows that there are lots of known vulnerabilities that need to be addressed in older versions of Java, it will have financial consequences to you. And what they're saying in this bill is that you can have fines of up to £100,000 per day if you haven't updated against these vulnerabilities. Now, the other thing that people do come up against is, well, okay, I want to move to a different distribution of OpenJDK. How difficult and how costly is that going to be? If it's going to cost me more than I have to pay Oracle for the support, then I may just as well pay Oracle. But the reality is that it is very straightforward. It's very simple. As I said, the distributions that we provide and the distributions other people provide are functionally identical to Oracle. So you're getting something which is a drop-in replacement to the Oracle JDK. Everything will work in exactly the same way. There is no requirement to change any code. There is no requirement to recompile any code. You can simply replace the JDK or the JRE. If you remember, I explained the Java Development Kit, Java Runtime Environment, and then you can run your applications in exactly the same way. So what we say...
Sorry, Simon, just to
Sure.
interrupt, because we do have a pause for a question. Thank you, Angie. Question from Angie. What are the options when a software vendor provides an installer with the Java bundled in? We use one that uses Java JRE that I've been asked to remove.
Yes, so that is a very good question. And the reality is that because Oracle have made all these changes to licensing and pricing, you need to be very careful with the software vendors who are providing these bundled builds. And you do need to go back and ensure that if they're providing their application with the Oracle JDK bundled, you need to verify with them that they do have the rights to distribute that JDK without having to pay for it. So they're not, that means that you're not then incurring the cost associated with that, because they could have done a licensing deal with Oracle, which means that they have the rights to redistribute the Oracle JDK, and therefore you're not exposed to the licensing that we've just been talking about. But if they haven't done that, and most ISVs don't do that, then because it's been free in the past, you now need to be very careful and make sure that with that ISV, if they say that you need to remove it, then you would need to switch to using an alternative distribution like Azure's Platform Core. So again, we could provide that, and we could certainly help you with migrating your applications to use our builds of OpenJDK. So hopefully that answers that question. As I said, in terms of the process that we have developed to help people understand how to do this migration, we've worked with hundreds of customers who've been through this, and we've come up with a sort of three-phase approach: discovery, execution, and validation. Discovery is often the biggest part of the work, which is simply finding where are you using Java. And where you're using Java, you have to identify which version of Java you're using and even which update of that version you're using. So once you've got a big list of all the places where you're using Java and all the different versions and so on, then you can go through the actual execution, which is to install the packages from the alternative supplier like us and replace the Oracle JDK. Now, because Java doesn't do patch in place, meaning that you don't change only certain parts of it, an update to Java replaces the whole of the JDK or the JRE. So when you're thinking about execution and doing the migration, it is essentially the same as installing an update from Oracle. It's just that you install the update from Azure rather than the one that you get from Oracle. Third phase is validation, which is just to run whatever tests you have to verify that when you've made the change to a different JDK, that everything works in exactly the same way that it should. As I said, there really isn't any issue with that from a functionality point of view, but it's wise to run tests just to verify that everything does work as you expect it to. And then to help you even further, we've actually created a book. We have the Open JDK Migration for Dummies. It is not a big book. It is A5 format. It's about 60 pages, but it goes through all the details of what you need to know in terms of planning your migration, executing the migration, and as I say, doing the testing. One thing I would say is that if you're using certain desktop deployment technologies, the older ones, such as applets and what is called Java Web Start, because they were never open sourced by Sun or Oracle, they're not part of the Open JDK distribution. We have alternatives that we can use. There's a thing called ICT Web, and we can do a hybrid approach for applets. So we've worked with lots of customers on this, as I said, and we have 100% success rate in terms of migrating applications. There might be a few configuration changes that we need to make to get things working, but we do have 100% success rate in doing that. And if you want to download this book, you can do so from our website. It's PDF. You can get it for free. Just go to OpenJDK Migration for Dummies at our website, and you can read through that as well. Just to summarize then, basically what we're talking about here is how do you keep your Java as secure and as stable as possible? And the things that you need to consider when you're looking at a different Java runtime is, firstly, do you have testing of those binaries? So is the TCK used? Because again, that gives you that very high level of confidence that what you're getting is functionally identical to the Oracle builds. Do you get updates to Java within a well-defined time span? Is it going to be days? Is it going to be weeks? Is there an SLA associated with that where you may not get a guarantee associated with getting that update at any point? Do you get all security patches and all bug fixes for all updates available? Do you get both the critical patch update, which is just the changes for security, as well as the full update to the PSU? If something goes wrong, do you have somebody to call? Is there somebody who's got a 24/7 support issue reporting system, which is what we do at Azure? So we provide both free and commercial builds, commercial supports through our Azure Platform Core. And so if you wanted more details about the pricing and migration survey that I talked about, there's also a link there that you can use there. As you can see on the right-hand side here, we do have a lot of very high-profile customers. So we are working with people who have maybe a few machines, all the way up to people like Salesforce, who have literally thousands, tens of thousands of machines, MasterCard, PwC. As you can see, all these companies run our Java. So with that, I am going to hand it back to Steve or Mark, who's going to talk next.
Come back to me, Simon.
Okay, I'll go back to Mark then.
Brilliant, Simon. Thank you, and I hope you all found that as useful as I did. And Angie, thanks for that question. That was one that I had to ask Simon as well. Simon, I've got a couple of questions, but really keen to get questions from the audience too, please, either in the chat or with a hands up. But to grow on Angie's question, I think where you talked at the end there about the support that you provide for your fully supported version of Java, that's great. Angie was talking about the where we see this bundled with applications. But actually, that there's also that very old-fashioned approach of saying, if you've bought this product, the only way that's supported is on this version of Linux or this version of Java or this version of blah, and you won't get support from the vendor of that particular product if you're not meeting the prerequisites. It's the mood music that sits within those boring terms and conditions that we all just click accept to. But I'm interested in your view, Simon, on actually how much reality that actually is, because one of the bits, Andrew, that we've seen, if things like MATLAB, for example, they used to ship Oracle's Java version 8. They're now shipping a different version to avoid the cost that you're talking about there, Simon. But they therefore then support that area they ship with. I'm just wondering, Simon, what you've got with regards to a sentiment that you've heard from other customers, perhaps, or what you've maybe experienced yourself with regards to how support organizations reflect on Azul being the underlying Java rather than the one from Oracle.
Yes, and that is one of the things that we do see very, very frequently when we talk to customers, because as you say, there's lots of third-party applications out there, and a lot of the time in the sort of before all of these changes, they would state that you would have to use the Oracle or the Sun Java before that. If you wanted to get support. If you wanted to use a different distribution, then they wouldn't necessarily support their application on that runtime. Now, the reality is that with Oracle making these pricing changes, and therefore Oracle becoming so much more expensive in many cases, most ISVs that we talk to now are seeing that the reality is that it's not practical to mandate that you have to use an Oracle runtime because of the cost associated with it. If you're only using, MATLAB's a good example. So if you take MATLAB, maybe you've got a few instances of that installed for a particular use. Why would you have to pay for Java for your entire employee count? So the ISVs realize that this is not a practical arrangement. So what we're seeing more and more is that the ISV is saying, you can use Oracle Java, or you can use a distribution of OpenJDK so long as it is TCK tested. So if you've got the verification that it's run through the test suite, matches against the specification, then they are happy and confident that it matches functionally against the Oracle JDK, so they don't need to worry about there being differences which could impact on their support side. The other thing I would say about this is that where there have been more kind of involved discussions with particular ISVs, we will certainly work with the ISV, talk to them about what it is we do, and we will offer to support for them their application for the customer as part of the customer's arrangement for the support. So if the application did have any problems related to the JDK, we would fix those as part of the customer's support arrangement, and they wouldn't have to have a separate arrangement with the ISV. So we can work around those things, but as I say, a lot of the ISVs now are saying as long as it's TCK tested, we'll support it.
Great answer, Simon. And Dave Eggleston, it's almost like you're in my head. The exact scenario that Dave has posted in the chat around looked at removing Jerry's from across all the client machines, but Core XR, now PeopleXD from the Access Group, also used at Glasgow. The back end requires Java Web Start, and actually that issue with regards to, yes, it's a very specific question, Dave, but actually I think it's quite common across the sector to see that product used. But it's a good example of the specific question I just asked. So Simon, maybe it is a question. Do you know if you successfully migrated Core HR or PeopleXD from the Access Group into using your product instead of Pareto?
Must admit, I'm not familiar with that particular package. I mean, this is one of the problems that we also get, is that people say, do you have a list of supported applications that run on Azure's platform core? And there's literally, thousands of applications. So we don't maintain a list like that, but we certainly work with different ISVs when required. As I said, with the Java Web Start side of things, we use an alternative open source implementation called ICT Web. It was started initially by Red Hat. We maintain a build of that internally that we can work on if we need to. And we've, again, had 100% success rate in terms of taking applications that are running on Java Web Start and move those applications using ICT Web with our OpenJDK implementation. So it sometimes takes us a little time, a couple of days to go through things and check the configurations. I remember that we've seen issues with things like security certificates and so on, but we know how to work around those because we've worked with so many different customers, and so our SE team are very experienced with this, and it should be a relatively straightforward thing to get that to work if it doesn't work already.
Right, it turns out, Glyn, it looked like you had exactly the same question, just slightly differently phrased. So maybe starting the question then is, there's at least two people on the call as well as myself that know that we've got the core HR people like Steve from the Axis Group as a potential problem that we know would need to be fixed before we could enter into a contract with Azure. How would you look to tackle that to help us understand that your product could work for us, even though we've tried to use some of the capabilities like ICT and struggled to make those work? How would we make a start if Dave was really keen to complete his transition from Oracle GRE and to say, actually, this is the solution for how we do core HR, but he's failed to make that work? How do we work with you to get that proved before we buy?
Yeah, you see, what we like to do with our customers is we say to them, okay, so you want to do the migration. We understand you've got some things that, like the Java Web Start, that could be a potential hurdle for you. So what we would suggest is take one of those or a couple of those that are going to be the ones that you think are going to be the difficult ones, and then we'll work with you prior to the commercials so that we can prove to you that we can get all of your applications working. So you could take that one where the person has tried to make it work with ICT Web, they've not succeeded. We could then have our engineering team work on that, and I'm 100% certain that we could get it working. We would have to potentially do whatever needs to be done to get that to do, but we would do that as a proof of concept. Once you're happy with that, then we move on to commercials in terms of, right, now you know that you can run it on Azure, then everything can move forward and we can negotiate on how many instances you have and so on.
100% certainty. I like that. I like the assurance around 100% certainty, Simon. That's very, very encouraging. Do you want Stephen to come in as a comment?
I was going to say, I don't know if Steve wanted to just mention, want to talk about like that sort of side of things.
Yeah, so thanks, Simon. So I think you're right. So there's the testing element that needs to be done to ensure that it's robust and it does what we've said that and we're committed to doing. And in actual fact, in terms of our contracting methodology, it's very straightforward. We don't have any audit clauses in our world, so that's something that you don't need to be concerned about. But we are considering and looking at a price book, a university higher education price book that we are currently discussing on our side. But typically the models that we have are based on a tiering approach. So we have entry level tiers and we count vCores within the server environment and then the end devices and the desktops and desktop devices. So we have a tiering approach on each of those. So it's a very, very straightforward way of transacting and the commercial side.
Again, always positive to hear. And Stephen, is that a contact you in the first instance if people are keen to explore this with you?
Yes, please. Yes, by all means. I think we've got a contact point that we've already put on for the slides here, but I can certainly be available, Mark, and be happy to have conversations with a number of different people who would want to reach out to us.
Great, thank you, Simon. You might want to stop sharing the screen. Actually, just gives more more real estate to people if they want to see more of you. Is there any more questions that people had for our friends at Azure? As I think we've got through the chat. If people want to put the hand up, I'll put another hand up. Welcome to take one last question.
I think there's one more comment I would like to make because obviously, like Stephen was talking about the way that we do the tiered pricing. The other thing that we realize is that if you want to go through the migration, you need to do that whilst you're still, assuming you have a contract with Oracle, you would do that whilst you're still paying Oracle for Java. And what you would then do is you'd obviously migrate to using Azure. And it might appear that you're sort of having to pay for the same thing twice. But we can be creative in terms of the way that we structure the deal. Again, I don't, Stephen, if you want to just like jump in here, but we can do things to make it so that you don't actually end up paying for the same thing twice.
Yeah, well, you're right, and I think you've pretty much covered it. But there are a number of different creative and innovative things that we can do around the commercials. So, if you're mid-contract, or if there's a conversation that you'd like to have with us about how you approach a conversation, that's something that we can happily entertain. But yes, that's very creative ways of how we can approach things from a commercial perspective.
And always encouraging to hear. That's not something you ever get from Oracle. So that's always a good message to hear. Right, I think we're at the end of the chat. I'm not seeing any hands going up either. So I found that really enlightening. Actually, I'm really glad you've taken the time to share your insights with our community. As we said, if people are interested in exploring this, Stephen's contact details will be available after the presentation. Please feel free to get in touch with Stephen. I suspect the Java conversation will rumble on for many years to come until we get to that the right long-term solution for everybody. But it does feel like Azul could well be in the mix for being a part of the solution for the sector. So again, thank you for taking the time. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm conscious the sun is shining in Glasgow, which it never does. So I suspect the rest of the country is having a fabulous day. So thank you for giving up your time today to listen to that. Any questions that you have, please get in touch with Stephen. Good to see you all. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.